Hello, Dr. Crystal Couture here with the Be Purely Balanced podcast. Today I am with Manny Muros, the owner and spiritual director of the Yoga Center of Newburyport. He is a certified practitioner of Thai Yoga Bodywork. He's a Reiki I and II practitioner, and he's an Anusara-Inspired Yoga teacher. He teaches Asana, meditation, and yogic philosophy. As an entrepreneur his entire professional life, Manny founded and served as the president of 3 corporations. He is also the founder and vice chairman of the board of the first public Montessori Charter School in Massachusetts. He holds a BS in Pharmacology and an MBA. Manny began his devotional meditation practice in 1995 as a way to balance his life as a husband, father, and entrepreneur. He began his study of yoga in 1998. His teaching style blends his study and practice of many spiritual pursuits, including contact and partner yoga, transformational breathwork, A Course in Miracles, and micro-chakra psychology, among many others. This diverse background gives him a keen awareness of the many available paths which to lead to self-realization. And Manny also has a new book coming out. It is called The Other Side of Me, A Journey into the Mystical and the Gems Revealed. Welcome, Manny.
Thank you, Crystal.
It's a pleasure to have you today.
It's my pleasure to be here with you and to share in this space.
So it's really my desire for this conversation to go far beyond the physical aspect of yoga. Of course, as a yoga teacher and as this being our first podcast talking about yoga, it might surprise people, but we really want to get into the state of being. So I'd like to ask you about the progression of yoga. People become attracted to yoga and are curious about yoga, often for some physical reason. Maybe it's balance, flexibility, strength, weight management, alignment, what have you. How does the physical act as a gateway for the mind, body, spirit, emotions, and really that more ethereal, mystical level of evolution?
Well, thank you, Crystal, for that question, because you're going directly to the point that I think gets so missed in our more popular yoga culture. And, ultimately, yoga is a training of our mind so that we can access deeper level of our consciousness. And that is truly the whole path of yoga has all these tools, all these practices and techniques that we use for that ultimate goal. And in some ways, because many of the yoga teachers have never experienced those states, they obviously can't teach it. They may have read about it as something mystical or out there. And secondly, this is a culture that wants to have quick fixes and feel good, so that with any type of physical activity, one feels good. You basically move the energy, the body releases hormones, and there's a nice feeling. There's a great feeling from when you go and do a very long hike, and you release that. And so there's a well-being that I think in a lot of the yogi schools, students will go for that and don't move beyond that. So the yoga system is a system. It has Patanjali described it with 8 limbs, and it has to do with how we consciously relate to ourselves, how we consciously relate to the outer world. There's a control of breath to control our energy, and there is the physical practice to literally move energy, almost like an acupuncturist would do with needles, except you're physically moving it, as well as opening the body so that we have greater flexibility to be able to sit, to be comfortable, and to allow the energy to move. And in a more refined asana practice, you really work to create sort of the optimal blueprint of your skeletal system so that the energy can flow without misalignments. And again, that would be a more refined asana class than many times you will find. But that is what asana is to take us toward.
Mm-hmm.
As one of the first limbs, by the way, in the system, is one of the lower limbs.
So the optimal blueprint of our skeletal system, this is a big deal. And, being that I have a background that is physical as well, this makes me think a lot about what it's like to move from that place, what it's like to be nourishing our bones, nourishing our bone marrow, stimulating, of course, those stem cells for really optimal function within our skeletal system. So there's something very important about that.
Yes, there's a beautiful physical experience when we achieve that, because we actually have a sense of lightness and stability. So it's this oxymoron of being grounded and light, which is, by the way, the definition of a guru. Guru means heavy, light one. So it's actually embodying that in the physical practice. It also shows us that in order to bring our body into that perfect alignment, let's just say optimal alignment, we do that by the proper engagement of our muscles in a sequential way, so that we literally can bring the skeletal system to line up. And that movement of the muscle is a hugging towards center, and then a lengthening of that center. And because everything that exists in the physical works the same way in the spiritual, works the same way on all the planes, it's also very symbolic and shows us that we have to draw into ourselves first. And we must remain centered in our being as we engage with the outer world. Normally, we're not that conscious. We're not that focused about living with such precision, where it means that I never let go of my true self, even as I am engaging with others. Not get lost in the outer experience. Always remain that witness, you could say, of myself within the experience.
This is really important. This is great stuff already. So this systematic approach and to yoga, it seems to me that if there's not a regularity of attendance in yoga classes or a dedication to a practice from not only the physical level, but rather even the intellectual level, because there's some brain work that happens when we're thinking about this structure, when we're patterning our bodies in such a way that we're missing the point. Is that true? Is there some benefit to, attending a class here, attending a class there, not having that regularity?
Well, I get asked that a lot. And I basically saying, any yoga is better than zero yoga. If you have a lousy diet and then one day you eat healthy, yeah, that's better than never eating healthy. But the yogic path is a path of transformation. And I believe that the key is not to feel that you do yoga, but that you are a yogi. And if you're a yogi, that means that you will be constantly looking whether I'm doing a physical practice or a meditation practice, or I'm just holding presence, being mindful. It's all about living from this place of integration with yourself. So the answer is once a week is better than none. I really do find that a good maintenance would be 2 to 3 times a week to sort of keep deepening and being solid. When I began to do yoga, and many of the students that I have that really make a lot of progress, you see that they come every day.
Yeah.
You know, they figure out how to do it. And then the progress is just so quick because you're building constantly without ever sort of going back. And if I were to hike every day, or if I were to play sports every day, the body probably wouldn't do that well. But you can do yoga every day and your body's fine. Because again, it's this, you're taking the body not to compete, not to perform, but to integrate. And that has healing. So you don't have the achiness of saying, oh, I just play soccer today and tomorrow and the next day it's like, oh my God, my body's going to die on me.
Yeah, definitely. So that brings me to a point which is interesting, because I didn't expect to talk about this, but you and I have talked about this numerous times about safety within yoga, and how yoga isn't something that should be producing soreness in the body. It isn't something that should be producing, as many people, especially in the Tai Chi world and the acupuncture world, are calling right now, these over-lengthening injuries. And that's because, you have a strategy. We have a similar strategy to this idea of strengthening and stretching within the practice. And so if you just want to touch on that, if you just want to explain that, I think it's important for people that are yogic, that are going, just for that flexibility aspect, that are going to really be trying to push. If you just want to dive into that topic. Yeah.
Yes. And I think this is so important. If you're going to do yoga, an asana class, we must remember to leave our ego, quote unquote, outside. Because that's where you get hurt.
Yeah.
And many teachers, unfortunately, in order to motivate you, they actually will try to get you to go to a place where you don't belong. You're not ready. Your body isn't open. So we have, every one of us has an ideal pose to do every single day, and that actually changes. The weather changes, what you ate the day before. So you, just because I was able to go to a certain depth in a pose yesterday doesn't mean I'm going to have it today. That's an example. So basically the ideal mental state when you come to do asana is that of, let's see what's here. Let me explore my body today as I come into triangle, as I come into these poses. So that's like the right attitude, I call it, toward the practice. It's not about accomplishing the pose, it's about exploring the pose. Then the next level related to what you're saying is that it is not about how massive or how big or how large I can be in the pose. It is about how present and how aligned and integrated I can be within any pose. So the whole focus becomes on this very detailed subtleties of movement that create freedom and strength and expansiveness wherever you are on that day. So it's not, sometimes balancing half moon, there's just a lightness and I can be there forever. Other days I start getting into the pose and the balance isn't there. So it's really just tweaking in this moment. How can I integrate the most? And then that's my pose. Can I enjoy into it? And the third point, which is I believe where you were leading to, is that the body should always be toned. So the muscles are engaged without gripping, just tone engaged as we move into the deeper stretches. So that we're not stretching ligaments, we're actually have a powerful, safe muscle that then can maintain its strength as it lengthens. And again, it's no longer about the ego being able to touch your toes. It is about having this experience of being so present, so grounded, so powerful, and yet soft and pliable as we move into it. And I know you know this, Crystal, but for our listeners, if the body feels unsafe, it has mechanisms to protect itself. And one of them is to tighten, is to protect. So that if you begin to do a deep stretch and your muscles are not toned, the body will say, oh, I might get hurt. And it will start holding you from moving toward flexibility to protect itself. Well, if the muscle is toned and you're moving into flexibility, the body says, I'm safe. I am protected. I know that I can just move into that more expansive self and nothing bad will happen. So
yeah, so this I kind of knew you were going to hit all three of those points, which is the fantastic thing about this intuitive relationship that we have and share. What's coming up now, this idea, this length tension relationship in muscle tissue, essentially is very similar to emotional responses, right? Because when we have some kind of emotional response, our body can do the same thing. It can go into this tightening, restrictive pattern that gets us nowhere near how we want to feel.
Right.
So I guess this is a good segue into, yoga as a healing modality, yoga as a overall balance system for the state of being. And that's our physical body dropping into our body so that we're grounded. That's our emotional body being settled within. That's our spiritual body existing, our soul existing within this tangible source. And then, of course, we have that concept of the intellect dropping in. So that comprehensive being that we are. Yoga as this healing modality. And of course, this has happened personally for you and also for your students. So what does it take for someone to experience that depth? And also what has that been like for you over the years?
Well, it's this is going to be a long answer. Because I'm constantly trying to observe myself and understand my own journey. And I always it's funny, it's hard to see yourself. You're inside yourself, so you can't really see yourself. You can feel yourself. But in, somewhat quickly, because I think if somebody understands my journey, and part of my book, the first part of it is actually an autobiography, because folks ultimately end up asking me, like, how did you get here? And then we'll relate to the little quirkiness of things. But basically, I was born in Cuba to a very, prominent family, wealthy family. And because of the revolution in Cuba, we left and came first to Spain and then the United States as a young man, as a child. I was 8 years old when I got here. And my whole life changed. Everything that was gorgeous disappeared. And basically, the area that we ended up in New Jersey couldn't have been uglier or more depressing in reality. So there was this inner drive since my sister and I and my parents got here, is to rebuild our lives. And like everyone else, the emphasis is always outside of ourselves, right? That's the life that had to be rebuilt, is outer life. Yeah. And honestly, I did pretty good. Went to college, pharmacy school, MBA, own a couple of companies, made a lot of money. and ended up by my 30s living in a pretty big life. And I thought I was doing good, in all senses, the American dream. And fortunately, I must say, I ended up in a business deal that did not work. And my phrase is, an entrepreneur is a glorified gambler. You hedge your bets, but you're still gambling. You have an idea and you're hoping that it's going to pan out. And sort of the last big business venture that I got into did not work out. And without having to get into any of the details, we just kept pouring money in. It all collapsed. And I ended up with this gigantic life that I had built with tremendous expenses. We're now talking 3 little kids in private school, big 10,000 square foot home, fancy cars, and no income. Right? So when I couldn't rationalize my way out of this, I ran out of any options that my mind could perceive. I went and surrendered, actually at a church next to my house, at a local pew, and basically said, God, I give up. I can't figure this out. Keep us safe. And that was the beginning, because sitting on that pew, I really began to feel energy, and I began to feel a sense of safety and well-being and love that I hadn't experienced before. And the outer world had not changed, but my inner world had. Somehow I had opened into the divine, and it came from surrendering. And all of a sudden, I just didn't want to leave that space. So I just spent endless hours very quickly with prayer and meditation and studying. And basically my whole inner world began to change. I grew up Christian, so my faith was Christian. And as I was having these experiences, there was nothing, at least that I could find within the Christian context, that explained what I was happening. And that's when I started to read the yogic books. Autobiography of a Yogi was one of the earlier books that somebody gave me. So my journey into yoga is somewhat backwards, in that I had my awakening. I just didn't have an understanding of what was occurring. And this is a long way to say, so sort of this state of being that I so much write about is really recognizing the reality of the ego, the reality of our personality, which is something we have, which is not who we are.
Yes.
And then being able to access that deeper part of ourselves, which is our true essence. And in my opinion, all of the yogic practices are to align your ego so that it can perceive your spirit.
Wow. So if we, can you repeat that? Define yoga again, just as you did.
Well, to me, all of the tools of yoga are to slowly refine our ego, refine our personality, so that instead of blocking our divine side, it can actually perceive it. And then we really have this integration of who we really are, spirit and personality and body. So the normal non-yogi person really believes that they are their ego.
Yeah.
They believe they are that personality. Once you can actually, in a sense, create that separateness where you can connect to your deeper self, then it becomes a lot of fun. Because in many ways, as a spirit, you start making choices for what you want that ego to be. How do you want to be in the world? How do you want to engage in this moment, in this experience? It is you've become the master of your own life, instead of sort of the sense of life is happening to me. It's like, no, we are co-creating in every moment. And in a sense, there is the greater shared experience that's there, but my power is how I relate to it. And having the freedom, the flexibility to be able to make choices. If we're really wound up in our belief system, if we're really wound up in our identity, there's very little freedom in how you can respond to a situation, because you're pre-programmed.
Yeah. This is what's possible when we tune into healing, when we tune into, for you, yoga as a modality of healing. It is possible for us to access consciousness. And this is where the magic in experiencing life as a human is. It's so powerful. It's so wonderful. We have this great, great opportunity if we tune into our consciousness. And that's really the key.
Right. But the whole work is in refining that ego.
Yeah.
And that's why I think it's so important. And many times I find as a teacher, like, oh my God, all I do is talk. But in some ways it's because I feel like I have to let someone understand a worldview and a perspective of themselves that now is the framework from which they can re-look at their lives. And it's not something that we get taught. I always laugh. Nobody ever gives us a little manual when we're entering life and say, this is your potential, this is what your body does, this is what your mind does. And that really hasn't been given. I mean, in the old days, it was oral traditions, and with the yogis, you just studied at the feet of a teacher. Right. That has been lost. On the other hand, now we have all this information available in books that didn't exist before. So it's a toss-up.
Yeah. So speaking of books, your book is teachings that you've been receiving essentially from spirit, receiving from this space of pure consciousness, and then using your being to write them and translate them into English, correct? They're in English?
Yes.
Yes. So this is pretty much magic. I know you, so I know the culmination of what has gone into this. I know the spirit of it, and it's absolutely wonderful. And I know people are excited for this book to finally come out. Is there something from either the book or one of your teachings that flows that you want to share today? Is there some teaching that you just feel really important to let our audience hear through your voice?
Thank you, Crystal. Thank you for your beautiful words. And if I can just elaborate a little bit, we'll get into the teachings. It was wonderful because I was basically guided in meditation to sort of write down what, the stream of consciousness that was flowing. And even until this moment, after having proofread it a number of times, I still read it and I'm like, I don't remember writing any of this. or in some cases, I remember that I thought I was going to go in one direction and the teachings came out to be in another direction. And what basically I've taken is 120, I like to think common sense, content, something to contemplate with about how to relate life from this state of inner being, because there are many, many layers to arrive there. We need to cultivate self-acceptance, instead of looking at ourselves into the outer world for acceptance, we have to recognize that we're one of a kind, we're unique. We should not be conforming for the sake of conforming. We should be figuring out how to shine our unique light as bright as it can, because that's our gift. I do believe that we are part of the tapestry of the universe. This is a quilt. We're meant to be our own light. So the teachings are really to help us sort of understand the importance of our own being and the intimacy that we create with ourselves. And only from that place of total integration in our own being, the fullness of our own self, can we be wonderful partners and generous friends and good citizens, because we're no longer looking for something somebody has to complete us. We show up complete. We show up with generosity. So that's part of what I think through the 120 teachings, there'll be sort of that layering. There's another part of this transition, which is really the thought I was going to say, because it really occurred to me. Our mind creates all of our issues. We have this thinking mind that is always worrying, creating problems, creating something. And through the years of practice, I have learned to be able to sort of shut down my mind, give it a break. And I always say, once you give your worries away, what is left? Think about it. We overlay the worries on our real truth. Once we get rid of those worries, what is left? Pure love, pure joy. And we have the power, because we don't need anything outside of ourselves to control that. What we do have to do is practice, become fluent in this language of spirit, of our own inner journey.
There's this, as you talked about in the beginning, this heavy groundedness with the lightness. So the connection essentially to heaven and earth, or whatever it is that you believe, right? So with that comes this power in the teaching, in the knowing, which is that pure consciousness. But it's not heavy. It doesn't feel heavy. It just feels natural. It just feels beautiful. It feels free.
Right. And what I want folks to understand, Crystal, and you're a perfect example of that, is that this is accessible to all. This is not abstract. When I use the title, and I did look at it because many people would be attracted to it, Our Journey into the Mystical and the Gems Revealed. When I started to do my practices, I did feel like I was journeying into this unknown land, and it was all mystical. And I read a lot of stuff written in the 30s and 40s, and it was all described with this mystical air to it. And maybe because of my own scientific mind, because I am that way, I actually started to say, this is not mystical. This is science. This can be duplicated. This is a practice. You just have to know where to go, and you have to know what the ingredients are, and you can do it. And you'll have your own unique experience to your own connection of the divine, not mine. And that to me is very powerful. We're not victims. We just have to make the right choices, to make this real.
Absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. So this is kind of where I wanted to wrap up in this idea that this sensation, this consciousness is accessible to everyone. So we did go into the depths today, and that was really the conversation that we both wanted to have and wanted to share. But for those listeners, perhaps that don't have a practice, perhaps that don't have the finances to get to a studio a few times a week, what does it take to kind of start from scratch and really make this dedication toward expanding. And of course, that comes with the general rule of thumb that there has to be no expectation, because once we put expectations upon it, we're in trouble. But what does it take?
Well, if you, again, I always laugh. I was one of those kids that always said, why? And when I ever read something new, I basically look at it that whatever is being presented, there's a frosting to it. But I want to see what the essence of that is. Yeah. And basically, in all the practices, they take us to the same place. So it's kind of cool, because you can figure out which one of those practices is easier for you, resonates for you. But the essence of all of them is to help us arrive at the present moment, to actually have an experience of what's happening here and now, and not being filtered through the mind, through the ego. So whether it's asana practice or meditation practice or breath work, they're all about becoming absorbed in what's occurring in that moment of time. So sometimes people ask, what would make me a good yogi? And they think it's flexibility or strength. And I said, it's presence. Yeah. It's your ability to be in the moment and not layer it with your conditioning. And so in many ways, I see it as a sculpture that might, show up and find a boulder. And somehow he's got to be present as he chips it away to create what he would like to have. But it's not predestined. You have to just have the presence to experience the moment. So again, many things that we do take us into that place, and that's why we feel so good. And we're not aware that we've actually entered a yogic stage. Because we just haven't been told that. And so one could be a yogi cooking, one could be a yogi in anything that we love, dancing, because you have to be so present.
Yeah. So what advice then would you give to the listeners? What would be your final note for today?
My final note is that our senses are usually focused on the outer world. Our senses are that whenever we feel not great, whenever we think something's missing in our lives, we look outside ourselves to try to fulfill that. And what I'd like to leave you with is that is a dead end. That might fulfill you for 15 minutes or an hour or maybe 6 months. But the shiny new car stops being shiny and new very soon. And that new partner stops being a new partner fairly soon. So the real gem is actually start living the life from a centered place, that your senses are aware of how you feel, are aware of your own being, and gradually moving to be what you want to be. I don't know if it's going to be too long, because this, I think, is important. Many times we feel like if I had this amount of money, I would have abundance. Abundance is an inner state. If I had this person around me, I will feel love. Love is an inner state. If I could get rid of these things, I would find peace. Peace is an inner state. So don't look outside. If we create it within ourselves, it will show up on the outside. but it cannot be created from the outside and brought in. And that, I think, is the biggest misalignment we have in everyday living.
Yeah. Well, what a spectacular way to end this whole conversation. Just being part of it, being present with it, for all of the listeners, is going to make people think. It's going to make people look inside, and that's a great place to start. So I love this, and I want our listeners to have a chance, if they'd like to get in touch with you. So Manny Muros, your websites, why don't you go ahead and share those?
Yes, I have. In a sense, I'm wearing two hats at the time for the viewers. Yeah. I've been the owner and spiritual director of the Yoga Center in Newburyport. It's the oldest center north of Boston, 25 years. And even though a lot of trends come in and out of yoga, we remain the same, really working to deepen in that practice. At the same time, I have been guided by Spirit to expand beyond the Yoga Center, where it has been my home and my cave, as I like to say, for way too many years to say. And so I have a new website, which is manueljosemuros.com, my actual name. And I have moved a little bit more into taking the teachings outside of the Yoga Center. This is coming in combination with the new book. And I do privates, I do counseling, and I do love to basically invite folks into journeys of inner knowledge. And those journeys of inner knowledge inherently create transformation, and in a very soft and loving way, because I don't believe any of this is ever forced. This lives inside of us. We just need to peel things away so that that light can be uncovered. There's nothing to be created, only to be uncovered.
Definitely.
Thank you, Crystal, for having me in your podcast.
Thank you for being with me.
And having our personal conversations a little more shared.
Oh, thank you, Manny. What a pleasure this conversation was. And, if you are in the Newburyport area, definitely check out the Yoga Center. And if you're not, definitely look into Manny's book and his teachings through the online modalities. It's so cool that we now have access to the studio in Newburyport, but we also have access to the world as well.
It is a wonderful new world we're getting to experience. We are getting closer, more connected. It is nice to sit back and enjoy the ride.
Thanks, Manny.
Thank you, Crystal.